each have an agenda on your table. There's a couple things on the back that are not on your table. One is a brochure that Gary brought. Gary is Dr. Gary Steinke, medical doctor. First Nixon was the very famous Tiffany Michaels. There's also some handouts in the back from the newspaper. The newspaper did a pull-out section. So I'm Jim Ward, I'm the host, but I also want to thank Morgan Hill Life and Gilroy Life for co-sponsoring this. They helped us get everything done. They did some interviews and ran the ads. We're very pleased to be able to present today. We do elder law and estate planning in my office. So we deal with these issues a lot. So they're very close for a number of our clients and extended family members. I put a goldenrod yellow kind of sheet there, that's an evaluation form. So before you leave today, please fill that out, let us know what you think. We're going to be holding more of these. We thought maybe we'd have 40 or 50 people, but we've got just about 200. So we'll be holding these in the future. We'll change the topics slightly, but hopefully they're all topics of very important and great importance to all of you. If you want us to be able to email you, just give us your email address. In the back there, we have a table set up. I have 3 assistants here. Cheryl, Lydia, and Suzanne will be helping. I also have my lovely wife, Michelle, here today. And today is Michelle's birthday. If you see a woman a lot shorter than me wearing a Michelle name tag, say happy birthday. If you don't have your calendar, you can't sign up for an appointment. We give a free consultation at the office. If you can't sign up now, you don't know, fill out the green card, hand it to one of them with your phone number and name so we can contact you next week and set an appointment, because some people come to these events and they don't have a calendar with them. There's also a brochure I put on there about people that I see all the time that have existing estate plans and they don't work. Someone dies, they have a problem. You gotta know what your plan says. Look at this brochure. And then we have the agenda for today. We're going to break at 1:30. When we break, the restrooms are down the hall this way. Refreshments are all in the back. We should still have plenty for everyone. We'll have a sign-up desk over there. On the back of the flyer, this is the flyer that has the picture of Gary and Tiffany. On the back is the schedule of our seminars for next week and for late April. Those are estate planning seminars. Then I've also included a list of documents, legal documents that you really should have. And then a 2-sided sheet of definitions that explains what those documents do, how they help you, what you should have them for. Also on your desk you have a few sheets together from Dementia Care Coaching. These are Tiffany's handouts. So when she's talking, you might want to be looking at those. The legal link one is Gary's handout on drugs, okay, and what some of these drugs can do as far as causing problems in the brain. Then there's also a couple articles about Alzheimer's and exercise that are attached to that. So you can follow along if you want, if you can, and hopefully you'll get more out of it that way. Everyone's got a notepad and a pen. Hopefully all those pens work. So if you have a question and you're afraid you might not remember it at the end, write down the question. After the break, we're still going to lecture a bit more, discussion, then we'll have a question and answer period, quite a long period, at least 20 minutes, maybe 30, maybe 35. And Suzanne and Libby will walk around with cordless microphones at that time. So don't worry about it now, but when we get to that, if you have a question, stand up or raise your hand and we'll bring you a microphone. And I think that that's most of what I was going to say right now for the general stuff. All right, so some statistics. Every 66 seconds, someone in the United States develops Alzheimer's. There's more than 5 million Americans who are living with Alzheimer's. By the year 2050, that number could rise as high as 16 million. 1 in 10 people aged 65 and older have Alzheimer's. 1 in 3 people over the age of 85 have Alzheimer's. More than 15 million Americans provide unpaid care for people with Alzheimer's or other dementias. In 2016, these caregivers provided an estimated 18.2 billion hours of care, valued at over $230 billion. And we know also that in many cases, the caregiver dies before the ill person just from stress. So hopefully you'll learn a lot today. I'm not a doctor, Gary is. Gary's been doing this kind of stuff for decades. Tiffany's been doing this dementia care coaching for more than 20 years. So now I'm going to turn off my microphone and turn it over to Tiffany and Gary. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for coming. It's nice to see a good turnout. Just as a little springboard on what Jim just said, those of you that are caregivers here, I just want to really quickly say a great big thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you for being a dementia caregiver. We know it's very difficult. So we're going to start with this handout, the umbrella. And I'm going to just explain real quickly what the difference is between the words dementia and Alzheimer's. Because we hear those two words used a lot, and often people don't know really what the difference is. So starting with the word just dementia by itself, if you just hear the word dementia all by itself, it is referring to the symptoms, the signs that you see in a person. So for example, forgetfulness, repetitiveness, agitation, hallucinations, all the signs and symptoms that you see in the top of that umbrella, those are things that the lay person or that anybody can observe in another person. And when we observe those symptoms, we call it dementia. So, for example, if you notice your next door neighbor having some of the symptoms in the top of the umbrella, you can clearly say, oh, this person has dementia. And again, it's not a diagnosis and it's not a disease when we talk about it all by itself, the word dementia. So we take that person that has those symptoms or dementia to the doctor, and that's where the doctor is going to start running some tests. And usually dementia is not accurately diagnosed in just a quick 10 minutes. You know, we got to look further into it. But some of the areas that we look at are, there are some reversible dementias, and we want to rule that out. So often it's ruled out through blood work and that type of thing. And some of the reversible dementias are not enough vitamin B12 or 2 medications that are interacting, or untreated depression, thyroid problems, stress. You know how when you're stressed and you're a little more agitated and repeating yourself and checking your calendar 6 times a day? That's dementia, but it's reversible. So once we treat these things, then the dementia symptoms that you're witnessing usually clear and go away. And so that's one category of dementia. That's what we call reversible dementias. And we do like to rule those out initially. And then we start looking at just situations in someone's life, like they might have repeated head injuries, or they might have a stroke or alcoholism. And some of those life situations can also lead to dementia further down the road. And if the doctor still does not find a reason for this person to have these symptoms, Then he's going to start looking at diseases in the brain, and that's just organic diseases that affect our brain. And there's many, many diseases that can affect our brain and cause us to have the symptoms that we call dementia. Some of them are frontotemporal, Lewy body dementia, Parkinson's-induced dementia, and Alzheimer's disease. But that is just one of the diseases that causes dementia. And nowadays we're getting much better at diagnosing, so you're going to hear a lot of other different dementias. They're not all Alzheimer's disease. Alzheimer's disease is a big one, and we're putting a lot of effort into that one. However, I have a lot of clients with Lewy body. I have a lot of clients with frontotemporal, and they get treated differently, and they exhibit very different symptoms. They don't all have the same symptoms up in the top of the umbrella. And so it's really important to treat them differently, medically, but then also when we're working with their behaviors and that sort of thing, it's really important to know what kind of dementia they have. So there's over 100 reasons why someone might have dementia. It's not just Alzheimer's disease. If you notice at the bottom of all these categories, there's a et cetera, because like I said, over 100 reasons, which is a lot of different reasons why someone might be exhibiting these symptoms that we call dementia. So, somebody that has Alzheimer's disease, do they have dementia? Yes. Somebody that has Alzheimer's disease, they have the symptoms that we call dementia. But somebody that has dementia, do they have Alzheimer's disease for sure? Maybe, maybe not. Yeah. Good. You guys are fast learners.
I can't sit. I got to stand. I guess that's my trademark. There's going to be a test today at the end of this. And the test is very simple. I haven't worn a white shirt in years. One of Jim's clients says, "Why does he always wear that white shirt?" So today the test is, you got a little guy with a white shirt, no hair, and a tall guy with hair. So you'll have to distinguish who's who at the end. That's your test. I'm really excited to see so many people here. Tiffany and I were up here. I'm going to take a few of my microseconds that I've got to talk to you. Each of these discussions could last an hour, and I think the most important part is questions and answers. So at the end of this, I'm going to linger around for anybody that has questions, because we're probably going to create a little bit of confusion in someone's mind, so that we're available to you, and that's going to be really important. Now, what Jim asked me to talk about was normal aging. When does it start, and are there some specific triggers? One of the most frightening but exciting things that we've known in the last 10 years is the onset of dementia. Now, I've been seeing people with dementia or Alzheimer's for 30-some years. And we always thought that it began when you started to have impairment in your memory and your thinking. Okay? So the horse was out of the barn and ran a couple laps, and when you started having problems with your memory, thinking, and some personality changes, we said, oh, you've got dementia. Alzheimer's disease, as Tiffany says, is only one of the causes. All right? There's several other causes. But if you had 100 people who had dementia, impaired memory, impaired thinking, and some personality changes, about 75% of those are going to have Alzheimer's. So if you're throwing the dart at the target board, you're going to hit it pretty accurately. Okay, it's that frequent. Now, when does Alzheimer's disease begin? With some of our new scanning techniques, we can find that the amyloid, which is one of the hallmarks of the disease, is deposited in the brain 15 plus years in advance of you having symptoms. So the disease is going on in the brain while you're doing your thing. You're living, you're banking, you're shopping, you're marketing, you're driving, you're planning, and so forth. But the disease is going on inside your brain for 15, maybe even 20 years before you get symptoms. So you'll see where I'm going with some of the my final remarks after the break is, what can we do to prevent this disease? What can we do to treat this disease? What can we do to delay this disease? That's the secret question that's important to all of us. So once you have it, it's been going on for quite a while. So that has some really important implications. Now I wanted to talk a little bit about, so when's normal aging? If you look at a curve, and it's really difficult to explain probably, and I may not do a very good job, but everyone that ages is going to get the hallmarks of Alzheimer's disease in their brain. But in some people, that grows and it develops more severely, so we start expressing symptoms. So everybody that's 85, 90 that dies, if we did an autopsy, we're going to find some plaques and tangles. Maybe only one or two, but if you have one or two plaques and tangles at age 50, you've got a dementia. Okay? So aging brain gets some of the very same symptoms that we find in the brain of Alzheimer's disease, except in Alzheimer's, it's much more prevalent. Now the question, what are the risk factors for getting Alzheimer's disease? Well, one of them is you got to live long enough. Okay, so aging is definitely a deterrent. So if you're going to live to 90, 100, you want to be able to do something that'll maintain your brain, and that's one of the things I'm going to be talking about. But other risk factors are genetics. Now, years ago, we used to say, no, Alzheimer's disease isn't inherited. The reality is Alzheimer's disease is inherited. If you got one family member that's got it in your family, my father, my mother, my sister or brother, the incidence of me getting it goes up 30%. So it runs in the families. Now there's another form that is genetic and inherited. And if any of you have been reading the Wall Street Journal, there's been a couple articles in there about genetic form of Alzheimer's disease. And we inherit a gene 50% of the time, so that by age 35, 40, everyone comes down with Alzheimer's disease, and they usually die within 10 to 15 years. So it's a genetic form. The form that most of us are used to seeing is something that occurs at 65 and 70 and has some genetic factors that aren't totally understood yet, but then there's a lot of environmental factors. Who knows about all the pollutants, the toxins, the stuff we breathe, eat, and so forth, how that affects our genes? Because, you know, we inherit a certain amount of chromosomal material, but the environment and the life we live changes those, and it may put some of us at really risk. So genetics is very important. The other thing that's very important is we know that people have diabetes. Diabetes is a risk factor for developing Alzheimer's disease, a multifold increase. The Latino population is at higher risk, and the African American population is higher risk. Don't exactly know why, but that's something that is being studied right now. Now, many of you know, when we look at the genetics, there's some very inherited forms, but trisomy 21 or Down syndrome, the majority of the individuals who have Downs by age 35, 40, if they live that long, have Alzheimer's, typical Alzheimer's. And that's how this whole genetic factor started to be studied and looked at. Now, there are also other situations that increase the risk of dementia, and that is, it's been almost, you know, if you read long enough and far enough, you'll find almost everything in life would probably cause it, and maybe it's just because we're getting older. But depression has been linked, so diabetes or vascular disease and depression has been linked as a really a major risk factor. Now, so normal aging, when does it start? And we talked a little bit about the specific triggers on it. And I think that as we look at this, as we study it more and more, there's hope that in the future there's going to be some drug that will help, not necessarily cure this, but what will be able to be possible to delay the onset. If we can delay the onset, we can live the senior years quite healthily, unless life then extends not only to 95 to 100, but to 110, then we'll have another problem, because life expectancy is increasing, and as Jim has said, the population over 90, at least 45 to 50% have Alzheimer's disease. So there's things that we need to do. So the point is, we're going to talk in the next few sessions. The thing that's important is it's important what we do when the disease is diagnosed, but it's very important that we look at what's going on, because treatment in the future is going to be looking at what's happening in those who are at risk. You know, think back a few minutes. I think I got a couple microseconds left. When you think back in the past, when AIDS was very prevalent, no one wanted to have an AIDS study done because of the fear. Well, we're kind of at that point with Alzheimer's disease. Who would go have a blood study done if they knew that it would tell them they've got an increased risk of Alzheimer's disease? That may be the future, because the treatments will be based on people who are at risk of getting this rather than those that are already getting it or already have it. The reality is the medications we have, you all probably know those, the Aricept, Exelon, galantamine, all of those drugs don't change the time that you live with this disease. So the beginning and the end are the same, but what they do and what the FDA says, they're to enhance the quality of life while you're living with this. So your memory might be a little better, your thinking and processing might be a little better, your mood might be a little better, and if that happens, the quality of your existence while you're dealing with this horrible disease might be improved. But the duration that you live with it doesn't change. And that's why in the beginning some of the some of the insurance companies didn't want to pay for it, because it didn't change life expectancy. So that's something else that we're going to still be challenging. So the genetics, I think, is important. You know what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to stop there, because the second part I want to have a little bit more time, and I want to talk about the drug list. This is going to scare the EBGBs out of most of you, and we'll go ahead and talk about how to maintain your brain on my part, and Tiffany's going to talk about some other things. So we got a couple minutes. Jim, how do you want to proceed? Go ahead, take a break.
There's food in the back. We'll take about a 15-minute break. So if you need to go to the restroom, please head on down the hall. There's food back there. Sign up for a seminar, whatever you need. We'll talk in a bit.
Okay, so I'm going to pick up here and talk about the stages of dementia. And again, this is kind of global, and it's not concrete, and it's not black and white. So all you engineers, I'm married to one of you, this will be hard. So when I talk about the stages of dementia, I use 4 stages. I know that if you Google it or you look it up on the internet, you're going to probably hit on the 7 stages of the disease. Those 7 stages, if you look at them, they are very, very particular, and sometimes it's hard to tell. Well, there's 3 of the things in stage 4, and she's also got 2 of the things in stage 5. Does that make her a 4.5? And so it gets really mushy. So we just go with really global 4 stages: early, middle, late, and end. Most dementias, like I said, there's over 100 of them. Most of them are progressive. Some of them will hold kind of steady, although I'm really hesitant to use that word. They don't progress as quickly, but most of the dementias are going to be progressive, and we talk about progressive, we're talking about getting worse. So they progressively get worse throughout the course of the disease. And very few of the dementias are reversible. Those are the things like depression, thyroid, mixing 2 medications. When you fix those problems, the symptoms that we call dementia go away. But the rest of the dementias, the diseases, the frontotemporals, the Lewy bodies, the Parkinson's-induced dementias, the Alzheimer's, those are all progressively getting worse. So when someone, is initially diagnosed, it's really important to prepare for the future, because as you progress through these stages, you lose more and more capacity, and you lose the ability to really rationalize and reason and make sense of things, and especially the big one is, making sense of important paperwork. So we really do encourage people, get your finances in order, get your legal documents in order, take care of those things early in the disease. Talk to your loved ones about what kind of treatment you want, what kind of care you want later in the disease, because everyone's got different ideas on what they want for themselves and for their family caring for them. Okay, so looking at the back of this handout, the handout that has the little man on the front, and then if you flip it over, you'll see the 4 stages of the disease. So when somebody is in the early stages of the disease, that's when they're really high functioning, and I believe, and people have different ideas on this, and Dr. Steinke might even have a different take on it, but I believe that everybody that has a dementia of some kind knows at some point in the disease that they have it, and it's in this early stage. They know that they're struggling. They know that they come back to work and they look at the project and they go, I don't remember working on this. They know that they got lost coming home from Safeway. They know that they're forgetting their phone number. And there's 2 camps. There's people that either say to their loved ones, something's wrong. I ran a red light. I got lost coming home from Safeway. I don't remember my projects at work. And then there's the other camp of people that try to pretend like everything's fine. And maybe we'll call them the ostriches. But they really try to cover it up. And all of this is happening in the early stages when the family probably is not identifying that there's a problem. And so they're very high functioning, they're still at home, they're still working, they're still driving, they're still doing fine. And even the people that go to a doctor and get a really solid diagnosis, they still may be working or driving. I have people in the very, very early stages that tell me, I have Alzheimer's disease, but you would never know it because they're so high functioning. So in the early stages, it's really hard to tell that someone is suffering, but I believe that everybody knows that they are, whether they get the diagnosis or not. And this is the stage where the difficulty with planning and organizing comes into play. And I always look at what I call the 3 C's: cooking, checkbook, calendar. Cooking, checkbook, and calendar. And those things you don't always see when you're just living with somebody. You might say to your mom, gosh, you're using the microwave a lot. And she says, oh, I've cooked all my life, I don't want to cook anymore. Well, that might be true, or it might be that she can't cook anymore, and she's just covering it up. And how often do we look at someone's checkbook? I mean, when I visit my parents, or I don't even look at my husband's checkbook. I assume it's all okay. But sometimes I'll go into clients' homes and there's like a lot of thank you notes from the National Panda Foundation. And that tells me that they're writing a lot of checks to the wrong resources. So you got to look at those things that we don't really see just on a superficial level. And that's what's going on in the early stages with somebody. And then they move into the middle stages, and again, somebody in the middle stages of the disease is usually still at home. They clearly need assistance at this time. They're going to have trouble with dressing and grooming, and might put clothes on backwards, or might not brush their hair, or forget to brush their teeth, or things like that. Especially if they have Alzheimer's disease, they're still going to have very good social skills. because that's one of the traits of Alzheimer's disease, is that they do remain social for a very long time. But they're going to start to exhibit some challenging behaviors, and that's usually when we start to hear from the families, either for a diagnosis or for help or guidance on what do we do now, or is it time for day center, is it time to move, that kind of thing. That's all middle stage people reaching out, because their loved one is kind of in the middle stage. And sometimes in the middle stage we start to have difficulty with nutrition and hydration. So we encourage caregivers to really keep an eye on nutrition and hydration. And if you walk through any memory care or day center, you'll notice they really, really push hydration and make sure that everyone keeps drinking and that sort of thing. Safety is more of a concern at that time. We look at the home, make sure the stove is secure and the doors are secure, and wandering sometimes becomes an issue because 7 out of 10 people with Alzheimer's disease wander at some point in the disease process. And so that's a big, big concern. I'm on the Safe Return program, and we get calls almost every day of people wandering. So that's a big thing in the middle stages. And then someone will progress into the late stages, and this is when they have their medical needs tend to increase. They need equipment, walkers, canes, things like that. Sometimes they need help with toileting, and they clearly need full supervision at this time, cannot be left at home alone. Need help with all their grooming and dressing, and they're unable to make any decisions. And so caregivers are making full decisions at this time. And then sometimes in the late stages, we start to see posture changes, stooped postures, shuffle walking, clenching of the fists, things like that. And they usually lose verbal skills in the late stages. So their language is very, very limited. Then towards the end stage is a very quiet stage, and this is often when the people are bedbound and we're just providing comfort care, and they again lose language. They lose their facial expressions too, and they get something that we call flat affect, where the best way to explain it, there's just no facial expression, no raising of the eyebrows when you walk in, no smiling, no response that way. And they're in bed or in a chair 100% of the time, and they need total care, feeding and turning and bathing. And they do begin to get muscle contractions, so they kind of pull up and get difficulty swallowing. And then we get to end of life. So this is the progression of the disease. It goes over many, many years normally. Some of the dementias are a little shorter in progression, and some are longer. But they all kind of clip through these 4 stages, some faster than others. So I think Dr. Steinke is going to talk about the rate of change.
A couple of comments. About 2 weeks ago, I gave a presentation to the Saratoga Men's Club. And I didn't realize it, but it was on Alzheimer's disease and dementia, and they were videoing it. And 3 days later, I was down in LA, and the court reporter looked at me and said, "Are you Dr. Steinke?" And I says, "Well, how do you know my name?" He says, "Well, I watched your presentation on YouTube." So it's already up there. There's a lot of things on YouTube that you can find that can give you more specific information on the disease. The other thing is in the back, there's a handout. It says, "Welcome to the club." This is the Alzheimer's Activity Center in San Jose. There's a number of clients we have coming from Morgan Hill. If you think you can use it, call them. Maybe you can carpool. It'll make driving 101 a little more tolerable. What I want to comment just on a couple things that Tiffany said. You know, early, middle, advanced, and terminal, that's kind of the stages I use also. one of the dilemmas is, if you think about what I said this morning, you got it for 15 years before you're diagnosed, then you have an early stage. And one of the realities is when you go to the physician's office, they have a study or test called mini mental status. And if you don't sit and tell them what's going on, and a lot of times in their 5-minute interview, they don't have time to listen to you, they're going to say nothing's wrong. When you darn well know that there's something going on because this person's behavior is not what it used to be. They're not capable of what they're doing, but they do a mini mental test, and that's a very rough test that misses a lot of early stage Alzheimer's disease. And the other comment I want to make is in the very advanced stages, and this is kind of one of my pet peeves. And I have a belief that I don't care whether you have a sad face, an apathetic face, whatever. There's still in the advanced stages of this disease emotional aliveness. And it doesn't come out unless you reach for it. You know, everyone thought that when this whole music therapy, give people an iPod, was just revolutionary. It really was. Why? Because it's stimulating that emotional aliveness. But get in their face, get in their presence, touch them, talk to them, sing with them, do whatever, and you will be surprised at what's alive inside. But if you don't reach out, you just have a flat apathetic affect. And that's one of, I think, the tragedies of this disease, that we think when you've got Alzheimer's disease, there's nobody home, and basically we just plop them in a chair, plop them in front of a TV, and we call that an activity. And that's really kind of a tragedy. Now I want to talk briefly about rate of change. I've known people with Alzheimer's disease live 25 years. That's frightening because everybody wants to know, you know, how long, I don't mean cynical, I don't want to be cynical, but how long as a caregiver am I going to deal with this? Because the going doesn't always get easier. Sometimes it does, sometimes it gets harder. What we recognize now is average life expectancy from the time of diagnosis is from 5 to 12 years. There are some people whose disease goes very fast and they'll die in 4 to 5 years. The average is about 9, some people go 12, and that's when the diagnosis is made, probably when you're about 65. Now there's some people in whom the inflammatory process going on in the brain is very slow. So a year from now you say they're no worse, so then you start questioning, is it dementia? It probably is, because everyone's rate of change is different. So it takes some time to be able to figure out where you're at. Now, in 2 or 3 of the handouts, the one that I want to spend probably the most time on is the medications. Now you've got this handout. Take this, memorize it, put it under your pillow, dream about it, because these are medications that are poison to the brain. Now you can go to your doctor and they're going to probably think I'm crazy, but I'll challenge any of you to try it out if you don't believe me, and ask one of your friends later on. Oh, it's coming better. Ask your friends later on, what's your memory and thinking about? There's a phenomena on drugs that are called anticholinergic drugs. These are drugs that are anti-memory. These are the drugs that cause people to develop acute delirium when they're in the hospital. All right? And the worst are the drugs that says on the right side. The second worst are the middle, and the ones with the least or mild are on the left-hand side. Now, if you're getting something in every category, you're getting a double whammy. There is absolutely no reason for anybody that's a senior who has any problems with memory or thinking to be on any of the drugs on the right-hand column unless there's an absolute reason for it. Now, Jim rescued me because he found this aging brain handout, which I had, and I didn't have one that had all the brand names on the right, so you can actually read this. So thank you, Jim. And if you look over on the far right, the first one is Elavil. If you go down the list, Dimetap, which we give, a lot of times. Dimetap, these drugs are anticholinergic, anti-memory, and there's no reason for taking them. Now, when you get the sniffles, and you go to the drugstore, go to Walgreens or CVS or any of those, and you want something for the sniffles, what do you find? Advil PM, aspirin PM, Tylenol PM, this PM, that PM. What's PM? Benadryl. What's Benadryl? It's poison to the aging brain. Don't take it. You don't need it. You'll survive just fine without it because it's anti-memory. To give you an example, one of the older drugs I used a lot, people used a lot for depression in the past, was Paxil. You'll find that on the far right-hand side. Paxil, a great drug for depression. Why did people like it? It made them sleepy. It's strongly anticholinergic. If you're taking Paxil and you're taking Aricept, you might as well throw your money in the toilet, because the Paxil will erase the effects of the Aricept that you're using for the drug. So, you go into the hospital and you have trouble sleeping. What do? They give you Benadryl for a couple nights, and then a few nights later you're delirious. They say you're sundowning. What are you doing? You're acutely confused. You're acutely delusional. Why? Because of the medications. And a lot of these drugs are really terrible. Now, there are some reasons that we do use those, but they better be good reasons. All of the ones on the right-hand side are very anticholinergic. Now, you go down there, one of the common things that we see in men and women, as you get older, you get what? A spastic bladder, right? Can't hold it, so you got to run to the bathroom a lot. So when you go to the doctor and they say, well, nothing's wrong, you just got a twitchy nervous bladder, so they give you a drug that cuts down on the spasm of that bladder, so you don't have to go every 2-3 hours. You can hold it a little longer. The majority of those drugs are anticholinergic. You look down the setting there. And anticholinergic means they're anti-memory, and they can affect your memory. There's also some studies been done that show if you take these drugs for 2 to 3 months and you're at risk for getting Alzheimer's disease, or as I talked this morning to one of the gentlemen, if you have E4 alleles, which is one of the genetic tests that you get, it means that you're at higher risk for getting it rather than anybody else. That may be the group that takes these drugs that will push you over from early or mild cognitive impairment to Alzheimer's disease, and it may not be reversible. So beware that these drugs are really potent. Now, I gave this talk several years ago out at the villages, and the room was filled with a bunch of seniors. And the people were sponsoring me. I thought we're going to all stroke out in the front row as I was talking about this, because they thought everybody was going to stop their medicines. But to give you an example, look over at the far left-hand side. There's a whole variety of drugs that people are taking. Now, I'm not saying don't stop them, talk to your doctor about this, all right? Because some of those drugs may be necessary. But if you look down the list, Lanoxin, Lasix, Haldol, a lot of the pain medicines, and one of them that you can buy over the counter frequently is Tagamet. Tagamet used to be prescription, cimetidine, then it went off the market, and you can buy it now. Tagamet is anticholinergic, and if you're one of those people that are sensitive, it can make you confused and cause problems. There's no reasons for it because there's other better drugs. The drugs that are usually bad are the ones that are antispasmodic, anticholinergic, that can cause you to sleep. One of the drugs on there, Unisom, a great drug to help people sleep. It's just like Benadryl. It's very anticholinergic. Most people can probably, if you're young, under 50, under 40, can get away with taking some of these drugs. But the reality is most seniors, I don't know what a senior is, over 85? Okay, most seniors can't tolerate these. Now, you may get away with a drug or two, 1 or 2 nights, but you won't get away with it forever because they can cause confusion, disorganization, and affect your memory. And there's other alternatives, so beware. I'm just telling you, because they will get you into difficulty. And if you look at the second page, it lists some other drugs that have been recently tested. The second and the third handout here have some comments about one of the things I was going to talk about a little bit in my next part, and that's how to maintain your brain. So if you accept the fact that when you're 60 and you don't have dementia, it may have been going on for 5 to 7 years, what can you do? Because that's the group we really need to be starting to think about. And there's a number of things that are really important. The last 2 pages talk about exercise. And the 2 things that you can do, what do you think? Well, some of you probably know. What are the 2 things that you can do that'll do the most for your brain? One is exercise, and the other is maintaining adequate diet and nutrition. Really sounds stupid, doesn't it? Something that you can do to maintain your brain. But exercise has been shown to do a number of things. Now, we know that we can cure Alzheimer's disease in rats and mice. So why can't we do it in humans? Well, that may happen in the future. But right now, with some of the research that's going on in some of the animals show that the animals the animals that exercise, and it probably has some truth with humans also, exercise is a stimulus for the brain tissue to actually grow and for neurons to connect. because exercise stimulates a chemical that causes neurogenesis, or nerve cells, to grow. And it's actually been shown in some animals that the hippocampus area, where our memory and some of our thinking is, actually gets bigger with exercise. Now, how much exercise do you need? Well, and how frequently? What we think right now is about 150 minutes a week. And the question is, that's not very much. Think for a minute. 30-minute walk 3-4 times a day. Is it a slow-paced walk? Is it jogging? Is it lifting weights? Is it the real strenuous stuff? The articles talk about that a little bit. It's probably not the stumbling, but it's a fast walk 3 to 4 times a week for 30 minutes will protect your brain. And the way it does is it creates a chemical that will stimulate the brain to develop and grow, because the brain is just not there. It can really develop and change very frequently. So it can stimulate cells to grow. And there's something about, getting out on a nice, crisp, sunny morning when the rain has been out there and you smell the flowers, you smell the freshness, there's no stress, and you feel good. It's just like the endorphin rush that joggers and runners say they get. The same thing happens to you, and you know what? That's good for your brain, because if you get to the habit of parking your brain and not using it, it's just like your butt. You sit on it, and if you don't use it, it's going to atrophy. So is your legs, and the brain maybe has a lot of similarities to your muscles. People that have an older person that gets into the hospital, doesn't walk for a week, it's going to take 4 to 6 weeks of rehab to get them back to where they're at before. So the goal is to really get them going. So diet, exercise is critically important. It's been shown over and over again. It doesn't take a lot. The studies that I quoted there said that people that do weightlifting doesn't do as much, as jogging is better. A fast walk is probably pretty adequate. But there's no reason, if you can't, not to do it, because it can really help stimulate your brain tissue. The other thing that's critically important is diet. Now, what is the perfect diet? Well, what has been known now is the Mediterranean type diet is better than the Western diet. Our high fats, carbohydrates is probably dangerous to our body. Now, if you think about what I said earlier, people with diabetes increased risk of getting dementia. So there's another reason for controlling our blood sugar, controlling our blood pressure, and controlling our lipids so that it's neuroprotective. And that's been well established, so it's something that we should pay important attention to. Now, what about the diet? The Mediterranean diet is more nuts, vegetables, fruit. And you've all seen, if you get any of these newsletters, blueberries, strawberries, grapes, broccoli, all of these things in a quantity have antioxidant qualities. There's a lot of medications that you get are antioxidant. And what they do is the brain uses, and the brain tissue uses a lot of oxygen. And as a result of that pathway, there's a lot of oxidative damage that goes on. And this has been shown in studies. So medications or fruit or vegetables or nuts that really are antioxidant can really be brain protective. And they've shown this when they've taken animals. Now, can you imagine a human being fed the same thing for 3 years, doing the same exercise for 3 years? Yeah, it's not going to happen, right? So it's hard to test in humans. But in animals, they've shown that they can take these animals, feed them the same thing, exercise them the same, and those that get the right diet and that get the exercise do way better. And now, none of this has been translated into humans, because you can imagine the difficulty in doing that kind of study. But if you just step back for a little bit, if it's good there, it probably has some real benefit to our brain. And that's something that we should be doing way before we're diagnosed with Alzheimer's disease. We should be doing it way in advance of that. So exercise and a diet are good. The other thing that's really important is I gave you that list. Avoid the medications if you possibly can. Now, you'll look at that list and see one of the drugs, the antipsychotic drugs, the majority of them have anticholinergic properties. So there are some situations where medications are needed to treat certain kinds of symptoms and behaviors, but we have to have a respect for those, because we don't always need it forever. And so it's being knowledgeable and controlling that, because people's quality of life is really pretty important, because somebody that's acutely psychotic with this disease is not going to have a very good life, nor is the caregiver. So we need to sometimes use medications, but if they're not needed and there's a substitute, by all means try and stay off them. Controlling blood pressure and diabetes, I talked about. Cognitive stimulation. What about mental stimulation? Word puzzles. There's no science that shows that word games, word puzzles do anything. But you know what? We just don't have the sophisticated technology to measure what good it is. And you know, if you think of the use it or lose it phenomenon, your brain is much the same. You got to use it. And if you use it with word stimulations and all this signs of mind games, mind tricks, there's a whole study on the internet somewhere where you can do mind games. And people who do that over the end are probably going to end up much better off. What about vitamins? You know, there was a study done, they took early on, several years ago, down in Southern California, a number of people with early Alzheimer's disease or mild cognitive impairment. They put them on a Mediterranean-type diet. They exercised them. They gave them yoga. They gave them vitamin B12, vitamin D, and did a number of things. And within 6 weeks to 8 weeks, many of them had reversed. They had showed improvement in their mental testing. Some of them actually went back to work again. Didn't mean it was cured, but we can tell that there's things that we can do that it can enhance the quality of our life. Now, most of you, if you're going to have wine tonight, red or white? Red, yeah. Red has antioxidant qualities. Jim said if we kept you here till 4:30, he'd provide red wine for all of us. The other thing that's important is social connectedness. Okay, when you retire, if you don't have a habit or a hobby, better get one. All right? Because going to groups, participating in groups, keeping your brain functioning is really critically important. If you retire to the sofa and you don't use it, you're going to lose it because your brain needs that stimulation, much like your muscles need the exercise, much like they need nutrition. It's really critically important. Now, I put in one of my notes is here, don't retire your brain. There's studies that shown that people that work longer get less Alzheimer's disease, so I'm kind of wondering when I should quit. Okay? People will work and keep active. Now, it's not the working, but it's the connectedness. It's being involved. It's thinking. It's doing all of these things that's stimulating your brain. And I don't think there's one thing that's really the secret. It's a number of things. There's some studies showing that turmeric or curry, which is ginger, is a great antioxidant. I was surprised. I walked around the corner of the health food section in Costco, and here's this big bottle of turmeric or curry or ginger. In some cultures that eat a lot of ginger, less dementia. So it's just another antioxidant that might be important. We've talked about smoking. I've mentioned a little bit about stress management. The other thing that's really important that is important to us, probably more important to the younger generation, and that is head trauma. Okay, traumatic brain injury sets the stage for dementia later on. Look at the National Football League. Any of you watched the movie Concussion? You know, there's some reality to that, even though the NFL doesn't believe it. You know, players oftentimes don't believe it till they get it. But the reality is that concussion is damage to the brain, and a concussion isn't just being knocked out. A concussion is any minor head trauma, a motor vehicle accident that just leaves you dazed for a few minutes. Some people don't recover from that right away, and they have vertigo and dizziness and all sorts of problems because it damages the brain, and everybody's brain repairs. Repeated concussions, and the most important thing is sports for our young kids. They're going to bang their heads together. We better figure out how to protect them because the damage may cause problems much later on, and no one knows how much. Stress management, kind of a no-brainer. Okay, we know what excessive stress does. Treating depression, and then the last thing on the list is the Alzheimer's medications. But the Alzheimer's medications, the Aricept and those, really don't cure the disease, but there's a reason for taking them, and the reason is that they have to do one of three things or the FDA won't license them. And those three things are they can enhance your mood, they can also go ahead and enhance your memory, they may not, but they can also improve your functional ability. In other words, your ability to dress, bathe, interact, and do all of those daily tasks that are necessary that as the disease progresses, you basically end up losing. Now, one of the things that there's, in addition to the new medications, the ones that we've got, there's old medications. I was just told the other day that Eli Lilly had a brand new medication on the market. Anybody see anything on that? It's supposed to be out. I don't know what category it is or what it does, but there may be some anticipation. The drugs that are trying to be developed are ones that will cut down on the amyloid that's being deposited in the brain 20 years before you get symptoms. Okay? And so we're a lot of stuff looking at those categories. There is, Tiffany, what's the name of the drug that's out now that's for apathy with memantine and what else? Robitussin in it. Yeah, there's the reason I bring it, I'm not pushing any drugs, but having dealt with this disease for so many years, I fought the psychiatrists and the psychologists and all that because, who's depressed? I'm going to make it real simple. When you got somebody with early Alzheimer's disease or even middle stage Alzheimer's disease, who's depressed? The person with the disease or the caregiver? Caregiver, right. Okay, later on in the disease, when you don't think there's anything wrong with you and you have apathy and a lot of maybe some crying and that, who needs the medications? The caregiver does. The caregiver's even worse off. So as you progress in your dementia and you get apathetic and you might cry a lot, that's what we call PBA or pseudobulbar affect. And for any of those you dealing with dementia, Google it. PBA, pseudobulbar affect. And there's some medication out that's called, it's a combination of, believe it or not, Robitussin and the Namenda in a certain category that helps that symptoms. It's not perfect, but it's not an antipsychotic. If you're having a flat affect, you're crying one moment, laughing the next moment, all my psychiatrist friends, that's depression. That's not depression. That's the pseudobulbar affect that goes along with the disease. And the reality is what you need to do, what you don't need to do is go to that list and find one of my stage 3 poisons and give it to them, because then you will see them really failing, because you're adding insult to injury. There's a medication now that has Namenda in it, memantine, and Robitussin of all the things. And in a certain group of people, it really makes them come alive. I've been using it in the nursing home in people with this PBA or pseudobulbar affect. And initially I wasn't a believer because I thought, Robitussin in this drug? My God, it can't possibly do anything. But after 2 to 3 weeks, sometimes even up to a month, I got rid of the antipsychotic drugs and I got rid of the anti-anxiety drugs, and there was some life that actually came back with appropriate response. So they weren't having this emotional volatility, which is very difficult to treat and drives most caregivers crazy, and everybody wants to drug them. So that's the end of what I want to talk about. Jim? Tiffany?
So I'm just going to wrap it up real quick with, we gave you a resource list here, and it's just barely scratching the surface of the resources that are out there for people that are caring for someone with dementia, or that you feel like you might have dementia. The one thing, this is pretty self-explanatory, and I can answer more questions after the presentation. But the one thing that I do really want to drive home is that you're not alone in this disease, and you're not alone in this caregiving process. There are a lot of resources that can help you, and above all, if you are a dementia caregiver, we thank you very, very much.
Not that I'm plugging Jim, but doing a lot of cognitive profiling. I do a lot of capacity testing. And I have some rather personal experience with people that did wills and trusts a long time ago and the laws change. Nothing stays the same in the law or in this disease or in our healthcare environment as you're well experiencing right now. So it's really important that you look at what you have and make sure it fits today's rules, because it's too late sometimes once you lose capacity. And there's a lot of people doing legal documents that really they need adjustment, they need changes, and they need someone to monitor. Just like you need a doctor to monitor these drugs, you need someone to monitor your legal and your health and your financial estate, because you can make mistakes that can be caught and can be reversed, and sometimes they're detrimental, especially if you change your mind later on in life. So it's really important, while you've got the memory and the thinking ability, or the person with dementia has the cognitive ability, they can still function. The reality is, somebody with middle stage to maybe even early advanced dementia can do a durable power for health care. All you got to do is know, this is who I am, this is my father, this is my son, I can't make decisions and I want him to. Fine. As far as I'm concerned, you can do a durable power. You can't distribute your $5 million estate, But you can do some simple things, and it's really important to think about those because sometimes we end up in trouble later on because we haven't given it a lot of thought.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, so now we're going to have question and answers. So we have Suzanne and Lydia that have cordless mics. So if you just want to raise your hand, they'll bring you a microphone. You ask your question, and then we'll try and give you an answer.
You can go ahead and ask. I have two questions. One, I noticed not on the list of bad drugs is Ambien.
Yeah, not on the list is Ambien. And the second question?
The second question is, I read recently where a woman in a hospital who was just being cared for and couldn't speak, had lost the ability to speak, and they put headphones on her and played the music of her youth, her teenage, and she started to talk again. Is that true? I mean, is that...
Yes, that's probably true. Okay, the first one, Ambien, over the counter. As we know it, Ambien is not anticholinergic, but you know, and it helps a lot of people sleep. I have a philosophy. The philosophy is I've never known anybody die from insomnia, okay? But if you don't get some sleep, life can be pretty damn miserable. So to take a sleeping pill, if you can't shut your brain off, other means, every once in a while, 2 or 3 times a week isn't bad. There are some people that sleepwalk with Ambien, and that's been the craze. The other thing, as people get older, all forms of sedatives and downers, even the drugs that I sometimes use, the benzos and that, they can affect your balance and coordination. So you can get up in the middle of the night. I don't know if you've ever bounce up out of bed and all of a sudden you're a little dizzy, you got to hang on for a second. Any of the sedative sleeper pills can make that worse. So you just got to be careful because they can have some side effects. And the other question, putting speakerphones on, Tiffany, you might want to comment also, not speaking. Some people with, you know, if you're mute and you don't have a stroke causing that, then no one's reaching, as far as I'm concerned, no one's reaching out to your inner. So if all of a sudden, if hearing is good, maybe they're hearing for the first time, hearing stuff and starting talking, that's not necessarily dementia. That's somebody who's just not reaching in, because you can't just talk all of a sudden with hearing music, but you can echo. You know, it depends on what's going on in the brain and what the conditions were. But that's one of the things that we found with people who had dementia. They put music on them and all of a sudden they started tapping their foot, singing and so forth. Well, that was always there, but no one was reaching it or giving them that opportunity. Anything else?
Yeah, we're using music a lot now to stimulate verbalization. And like Dr. Steinke is saying, if you put music on and they start having a conversation about something totally unrelated to the music, then that's not dementia. So you'll see someone that hasn't spoken for a very, very long time and they know every single word to Amazing Grace or one of their really favorite songs. And sometimes I will even sing instructions to them and they'll be a little more responsive. So music is really important. I really highly encourage people to use that.
With dementia, I had an 80-year-old who played blackjack or a card game with his wife. He couldn't talk, he smiled, he fed himself, but he's very advanced dementia. And to the day he died, he played card games with her because that part was repetition in his brain. So, you know, don't assume because they can't talk, you can't get through to them, because you're amazed at what stimulus will bring out and bring them alive. Music happens to be one of those.
First, could you spell the PBA so I don't find polar bear agitated or something?
Pseudobulbar affect, PBA.
How do you spell it?
If you Google dementia PBA,
Oh, dementia PBA, okay.
you'll probably find it.
The other thing is, yeah, the plasticity. That's what I hear you saying.
Yes.
When we were growing up, we had to breathe lead in the environment from the lead and the gas, minute particles, but it's out there. And has there been any research on that? In other words, living in the mountains, is that safer than living in the dense city? I would assume so.
Probably for a whole variety of reasons. No active research that I know going on, but it takes, there's areas where the water's bad, the air's bad, and a variety of things are bad. And overnight it probably doesn't cause any problem, but over years it probably does. And who is it going to affect? Those of us that are over 70, 80, okay, because we bathed in it. Look at the pesticides, DDT, 2,4-D, and all those that most of us grew up with and thought it was washing, you wash your hands in it. And so there's a lot of toxins that we get exposed to that no one knows what effect they will have later on. But, big industry kind of hides that under the table, just like the NFL and concussions.
And when I go to my heart doctor and tell him I don't want to take metoprolol or toprol anymore, and he says the risk is not worth the reward to quit the drug, I got to tell him I don't want this colon generic. Are there other drugs to replace these?
Special in the second and the third column, there are medications. Now, relax. Not everything in the column 1 is bad, but if you're sensitive to it, it could be bad. If you add 1 and 2 together and 3 together, then you're taking poison. So there's some people that tolerate the ones in the first category and have no trouble at all. It all depends on your brain, its sensitivity to these drugs, because not everyone's sensitive. I had a gentleman, I like telling stories, that was in his 70s and he had atrial fibrillation. I put him on Coumadin, and this was, 20 years ago. And he came back a week later and said, "Doc, I can't take that. It just makes me crazy." And I thought, oh, Lord, here we go. How can Coumadin that we give to everybody make you crazy? I didn't realize it's got anticholinergic properties. He was right. I didn't recognize it. So for some people, they're really bad. Some people can take them, and you kind of have to know where you're at. But as you get older, anybody that I've got on these medications that's over 70, 75, that has any problems at all with their cognition, why take it? There's a substitute. Ask your doc for substitutes.
Well, thank you for your presentation.
There was a question, we're going to answer it, about what happens when you go into the hospital and you get general anesthesia and you don't wake up anymore, or you have trouble with your memory and your thinking and all that. That's a complex problem. The problem is most of the anesthetics that we give that put people to sleep for hours and so forth probably have anticholinergic properties. So if you wake up and you expect to be on top of your game, you're probably not going to be. Now the dilemma is who are we giving these to? Well, there's the older population that has vascular disease. It's been well known when people went on the bypass pump for cardiac surgery and they woke up and they were delirious and it took them months to get back on their feet again. Their cognition wasn't. What we recognize is a lot of those people having minor strokes, having little mini strokes from emboli, from all the stuff that's going on shooting to their brain. So, there's risk. If you need a major surgery and that's the only way to get it and improve your quality of your life, there's probably some reasons to have to do it. If you can have surgery and have more of a local or not have anything that puts you under so you need all of the extra support, you probably would better off if you can get by with a spinal and some conscious sedation, okay? Because anticholinergic drugs can really affect you. So, sometimes you just got to have it, because quality of life really depends on it. And there's new techniques and new ways of trying to get people through this that are much better than what we had in the past.
Okay, question.
Yes, as an adolescent, I fell and injured my head, a concussion, and most of my life I've dealt with chemicals and things like that because I was a farmer. So how much does that increase my risk?
So was I. I bathed in that stuff for years. The question is, does head concussion and chemicals? There's no absolute answer. If you get to 75 and your brain's working pretty good and you're doing all your stuff, I'd say you probably got a pretty good genetic constitution. But if you're one of those people that has a strong family history and you have the E4 allele, what may put you at risk if you're going to live long enough, those things may have some benefit. Now, does one concussion cause the problem? Probably for most people, no, because the brain's pretty resilient. But if you bang your head every day, like they did in the concussion movie, if you intentionally do that all the time, you could get into trouble. But it's the sort of thing that if you can avoid it and not suffer that trauma, you're probably going to be better off, because the reality is the body is so resilient. You can get by with half your liver, get rid of one kidney, you can do fine. Get rid of one lung, you can do fine. You can't cut your brain in half, but the things are we've got plenty of body parts and some regeneration, and heck, in the future we're going to generate heart cells. Look at the new research. So there's things that are going on that are protective, but when you start looking at things that we know now that were bad in the past, it certainly leads to concern. The toxins are probably more of a risk for cancer and other problems, less so for brain, but we don't know that. I'm just supposing that's probably true. But those things are neurotoxic also.
Okay, we have a question over here.
I was given head and neck radiation treatments for tonsillitis at the age of 4. How would this affect me with this type of background?
Nothing's absolute, but as we know it, probably of no significance. In fact, the radiation can certainly affect your thyroid. And that's taken care of. But as far as the brain, hopefully the radiation was pretty focalized to your tonsils. Back then it's hard to tell whether they radiated from your head here to your neck. But one episode, probably not a risk, not that we know of as a risk factor. But, when they radiate brain tumors, you know what the effects of radiation are. So I can't give you a good answer, but if you've got 50 years behind you and the brain's working good, probably not of any significance.
Well, about 25 years ago, I wound up with breast cancer. And they decided it was because of my radiation I received as a child.
I can only comment as if the radiation was localized. When you look at the potential factors that can put you at risk for breast cancer, there's a whole variety of ones, and even if you don't have risk factors. So it's hard to know if pure tonsil radiation was a factor. It could have been. Maybe that ray was much broader, but I don't know of any effects of the local radiation on any part that have caused the brain to fail. But it's pure supposition on my part.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
So there's a lot of help for caregivers. There's local support groups here that I facilitate. There's a support group, I believe, at Live Oak and Gilroy. And I think Westmont might even have one. They're listed on your resource list. Also, the Alzheimer's Association, they are there to support caregivers, and so is Dementia Care Coaching. So those are all places that are really specific on the caregiver who is caring for somebody with dementia. And then some of the other day centers, like the Alzheimer Activity Center in San Jose, they have support groups also. And they really focus on taking care of the caregiver as well as the person with dementia. So that's where I'm encouraging you to, a support group is a good place where you can go free of charge. You get the facilitators' help and advice, and you get the support and encouragement from, 6, 10, 15 other people in the room that can say, yes, I have your same feeling. I have your same frustration. I have your same grief. And that's where I really, really encourage people. Even somebody today said, I'm not a support group type person, but I went to your group once or twice and I came away with something that has helped me for years. So even if you're not a support group person, then it might be good to just kind of stop in and get a little bit of help. And so all of those are listed on your resource list, because the caregiver is the one that really takes a hit as far as their health goes. And so and you're the one that we're looking for long term. You're supposed to be the well person, right? So we do work really hard to keep you well, emotionally and physically. So please reach out to the resources on your list.
Okay, we have a question in the back.
I'm just curious about the two types of characteristics, belligerent or docile. Is that a fact about Alzheimer's disease?
No, not everybody's belligerent, not everybody's docile. It all depends on the individual. My personal belief is that the dementia can bring out a lot of kind of undesirable characteristics, but The majority, well, maybe I shouldn't be so definite, but the majority of time, the undesirable behavior that we sometimes see is brought on by the caregiver because we don't know how to deal with them. The sun rises in the west, who cares? It rises in the west. If it's time to eat or do something, who cares? It's time to eat. So we try to structure somebody who's got dementia in our way and what's happening in the time and so forth, and we really create frustration. So a lot of times they really act out those kinds of behaviors. But there are natural delusions. Sometimes there's hallucination. A hallucination is seeing or usually hearing things, sometimes smelling things. A delusion, which is more frequent, is a misinterpretation of reality. This is not my husband, this is some strange lady or some strange man who's in my room. Okay? I'm not seeing them, they're there, but it's a misinterpretation. Very, very, very common in this disease. The other thing to add to Tiffany's comment, the Alzheimer's Activity Center in San Jose has a support group that's every third Thursday. So if any of you are down there, I run that support group. So it's an opportunity not only to find out, but if you've got medical questions, you've got concerns, you want to know how to deal with things, we deal with a real broad scope of things. It's from 4 to 5 on the third Thursday of the month. If you call the Alzheimer's Center, you'll find it.
Okay, we have more question in the back.
What are the real practical things when you have a relative that has Alzheimer's? One of the things that is most difficult is finding an appropriate center or facility. Is there any organization that has evaluated the facilities in Santa Clara Valley, and how do we reach them?
The group, the daycare centers, dementia-specific adult daycare, are all monitored by the Department of Social Services. Adult day health care, I believe, is monitored by the health department, as are skilled nursing facilities. They're under a different license. But there's no organization that goes out and that I'm aware of, are you, Tiffany, that monitors the quality of these centers? Most of that is done by word of mouth and by people that have attended those.
But a lot of the residential facilities Tiffany is familiar with, and she visits them, and she knows what they're like.
Okay, great. Next question here.
Hi, I'm Corey. Thank you for your great food back there. Can you hear me? If not,
Yeah, thank you for the great food back there, Jim. Fruit. Oh, that was a good comment.
okay.
Well, most of those that are, well, let me ask you a question. What do you think Costco sells the most of? No. Second, wine. What's the first most common? Toilet paper. That's a fact. Toilet paper. And the next, the vitamins, when you go there, there's mega vitamins. Well, the body, if it's provided with good nutrition, some vegetables, fruit, some protein, and none of those to excess, it's built to run on regular gasoline. Okay? Some people feel much more fanatic about supplements. Does mega doses of vitamin C help or hurt you? Some people it hurts. Do mega doses of vitamin E, A, D, E, and K, do they hurt? Yes, they can. Many people are deficient in vitamin D. Okay? And so vitamin D supplementation can be helpful. You can check the level in the blood and find out if you're low. Antioxidants, I can't criticize anybody that's using antioxidants in the form of, Big Red and vitamin E and fish oil and all those. Those are probably, if you're not eating well, and most people have a pretty lousy nutrition. If you're not eating well and getting a balanced diet, these supplements probably don't hurt, but to take mega doses of those, I think, is potentially dangerous, and you can overdose on those. So, some of the antioxidants, there's some very good work done showing antioxidants are neuroprotective. The question is how much, which ones, and so forth, and nobody knows, so a good common sense approach probably works better than anything else.
We have to clean out pretty soon for another group coming in, so we're just going to take 2 more questions, okay?
There's like 5
and there's
people
like
in the
38 hands, but
Yeah. Okay, I'm right
well,
here.
the young woman over here who thinks she's my mother says that her husband has a question, but we'll take a couple more questions here.
Right. My question real quick is, you guys mentioned earlier about taking a quick look at the books. How do you tactfully have that conversation with your dad that says, hey, I understand that you would just want to take a look at the book just to make sure everything's kosher for, that everything's kind of planned well, because I know that's kind of an issue at times.
I'll give you my 2 bits. I think it's complex, but I think the thing is, anybody that's got some memory or some thinking, until they get to the point where they don't care, that's obvious. Early on, they want to manage it all. It's like driving. And then in the in-between, if they can't do it, you got to be a part of it, but you got to be supportive. But if you lock them out of it and don't involve them, then you just create another issue where they think you're stealing from them. They're going to think that you think they're stupid and they can't deal with it. So it's really difficult. There's no one real easy way but to keep them involved as long as they can, and have them sign the check. You write it, show them what it is. They probably wouldn't have known anyway. Some people write their name in the memo part of it, but life could be even worse. But as long as I think you keep them involved, and they know what's going on, even though they don't understand the complexities, you'll do better. And then some people, even to the very end, will resist you. So it's not easy. Any other thoughts?
It's the same, just like Dr. Steinke said, maintaining dignity is really, really important to me. And so kind of doing that dance where you do maintain their dignity while at the same time protecting their assets or their resources is really important. And so oftentimes you need more of a one-on-one to find out, well, what are the family dynamics and how can we set this up to maintain dignity and maintain assets and finances.
We have a question back here.
The biggest thing is to keep people from the scammers. Okay, very smart, intelligent people have gotten taken in by the scammers to the tunes of hundreds of thousands of dollars because they think they're going to win.
A couple of weeks ago, I saw a study that was done on TV, or it was on the news, that they were using ultrasound therapy to break up amyloid plaques.
I don't know anything about it, but it'd be interesting, but I don't know whether it's a benefit or what the study showed. I kind of remember that now about ultrasound being used for that. Ultrasound is now being used and sound wave sonic therapy for a whole variety of things. Whether it'll break up the amyloid plaque would be interesting.
Yes, I'm a little over 90, and I still think I have most of my marbles. My wife doesn't.
Neither does mine.
I have a one bad habit. I take a sleeping pill every night because I just can't shut my brain off.
What do you take?
Sleep aids.
Sleep aid, what kind? Yeah, most likely, well, if it's melatonin, it's fine, but if it's Unisom or Benadryl or one of those, you're doing remarkably well then, because those are the category of poisons that you shouldn't take, and you'll probably do better. So, you ought to talk with your doctor. There's an herbal preparation called valerian, which is in tea. It's a natural Valium type compound. Some people swear by it, and if your system is sensitive to it, that and melatonin are probably safer. The sleep aids you buy in the drugstore, I would be careful. You're going to find them on the third category there. Now, your brain may just do well with them as a testimony that they're not as bad as I say, but you're one in a million.
Thank you very much.
I got one more question on the back.
Hi. The person I'm taking care of was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment or early Alzheimer's back in October of 2015. She gets in moods where she says that basically she doesn't want to live if she's still around when she's in the late category here or the end category. Just wondering if you have any suggestions on how to respond to that.
Yeah, just a brief clarification, Tiffany, you might want to comment also. Mild cognitive impairment is not considered Alzheimer's because all it is short-term memory impairment. Now, if I had mild cognitive impairment, maybe I do, but I'd be pretty uptight and anxious, and if you walk the walk that I walk, boy, do I want to find myself in the dilemma that I find some of my clients in? And my answer is no. So what do you do about it? So can you recognize it early? Is it frustrating? Is there mood changes? Absolutely, because if you recognize what's coming down the pike, it's really frightening. It's really frustrating. In that situation is one of the few times when I think seeing a counselor and possibly some medications for short term to enhance mood and deal with that. But most important, being around somebody who's supportive, loving, being in a group of friends and family that are nurturing is probably as important as any drug, because you'll go through that phase. Mild cognitive impairment can lead to more cognitive impairment, i.e. early dementia. So if you're there, people in the early stages, it can be really pretty terrible, because you recognize you can't do anything. You recognize what the future is. You look around and watch TV and you see all these things, and it's enough to scare you. So it's frightening, and the environment and the nurturing is probably the most important. Yes, sir.
All right, so we have to cut it off. I'm sorry, we should have booked it for longer, but the room wasn't available. So we're going to end it now. Please turn in your yellow sheet evaluation. Give us your email if you want us to contact you for the next one. There's a green card there. If you didn't get a chance to sign up for a free consultation with me, turn in the green card over there back at the door. Give us your phone number. We'll give you a call. Thank you very much for coming. Thank you, Gary. Thank you, Tiffany.
We'll step out to the back if anybody didn't get a chance to ask any questions. We've got a few more minutes.